Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to go through topic 3, which is all about social change of the Britain paper, paper 1. Um, so, the first thing to think about when we're thinking about um, topic 3 and social change is what do we actually mean by social change? This is something you might have to define in an essay. So, the way that I tend to define it is here. So, how people think, where people live, and changing status. Um, I mean, you could probably come up with some variation of that, something slightly different if you want to, but I think it's important that you have an idea of what we really mean by social change. Okay, so that's the first thing to make a note of. The next thing, or the whole point of this topic, really, and we'll look at some questions in a second, is this. I really like this grid, which is this wasn't actually my idea. This is a student a few years ago came up with this idea, and I thought it was really good. So the columns here are the factors that cause social change. So you could get a question on how far do you agree that legislation was the most important cause of social change? Okay. And then you would compare legislation to maybe war and population growth. Okay. Or ideas. So there's kind of 4 there. There could be a variation on these things. These things aren't set in stone. But these are the general areas that you'd be talking about. So it's really important that you've got a kind of confident understanding of the factors that cause social change. And then from left to right, the rows are thinking about the people or aspects of society that were changed. So women, how much change was there for women? How much change was there for the poor? Gentry and nobility, science, radicals. So and then you should, again, you should have really, a clear understanding of how things change for these different groups. Okay. Because you could get, as I said, you could get a question talking about which factor is the most important cause of social change, or you could get a question um, generally on how much social change took place, and then you could compare some different groups in society, for example. Or there are some questions that are quite specific. How far do you agree that the status of women changed between 1625 and 88? And then you would just look at these different areas and to what extent they changed things for women or the poor or gentry or nobility. So factors, and then people or groups or aspects of society that have been changed. I'm not going to go through all the evidence. You can do that, and you can see that here in this pack. So what I would suggest, again, because this is a kind of change in continuity topic, I think doing graphs here is really important. So having an idea for each of these different groups, here, or aspects of society, what does change look like? What does change look like in this topic? Um is it a straight line? Is it a line that goes up slowly? I would argue for this topic that it's like a kind of uh a bell curve, that it kind of goes up at the top in the middle in the period of the Republic, that that's the period of the most change, and then it actually goes back to how it was previously. The Restoration literally does restore um, restore society. Okay, there are changes. Some things change, and I think something like population growth does change things across the period. So there is some change in 88 to 25, but there's a lot of similarities and things like the legislation affecting women, for example, the religious toleration. A lot of those things actually were reversed. So that's something you can think about. So if we just have a look at some kind of key questions here. Um, Another way you can do it, sorry, I just mentioned this, is what the analysis of these different areas. So here's some key evidence. You can just analyze them, the extent to which things changed. Okay. Um, so this is kind of overarching question. How far do you agree that British society changed radically? So obviously the key word there is radically, and we've looked at this in class, but radical change, unprecedented, long-term, widespread, transformative, those kind of things, they're the kind of buzzwords that you use in that. And then you'd look at I would, if it's British society change, you'd look at different groups or what happened for women. Where was the status of women radically changed? What about the poor? What about the gentry and nobility, for example? You could do it by factors. You could do war, ideas, population growth. You could definitely do that. And then say to what extent they change things radically. Um, so you can see how there's kind of two ways into that question, either who's being affected or the factors that are causing the change. And then was it radical? So you just link back to those kind of key words in the question. Um, so I think that's relatively straightforward. And then the other kind of question you can get is a factor question, as I was talking about before, to what extent were new ideas the most significant cause of social change? So you compare new ideas to, say, war or legislation or population growth, and then weigh those up. As I've said, you can get more narrow questions just on different groups. So I think it's definitely worth planning out a question. How far do you agree the status of women changed? How far do you agree the lives of the poor changed? That kind of thing as well. So definitely, gentry and nobility, something like that. So definitely do that as well. These are quite broad because this is a revision pack. I wanted just to keep them quite broad, so we're covering most of the information. But hopefully that's clear for this topic. I think it's relatively um, straightforward. There have been some, and in your Britain revision pack with all the past questions, you'll be able to see there have been some um, quite narrow questions, like for example, the causes of population growth. But there are also broad questions as well. So just have a look at those, and hopefully this has been a useful way of kind of breaking down the topic. All right, thank you.